The United States has officially begun voting on Tuesday to elect its 47th president after the conclusion of turbulent campaigns. The New Hampshire hamlet of Dixville Notch opened its polling at the stroke of midnight on Tuesday, traditionally marking the start of the U.S. election hours before the rest of the country does. People in Michigan enthusiastically lined up at polling stations to cast their votes. Michigan, remember, is one of the 7 key battleground states where U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris is running neck and neck with former U.S. President Donald Trump. Voters in North Carolina and Georgia also cast their ballots on Tuesday. Republican vice presidential candidate J.D. Vance cast his vote in Cincinnati, Ohio. J.D. Vance joined millions of Americans who were headed to the polls to choose the president.
Look, I feel good. You never know until you know, but I feel good about this race. I felt good about my own race a couple of years ago when I voted in this exact same spot. Hopefully it goes as well for President Trump and me as it went for me a couple of years ago in the state of Ohio.
So Vance has voted already, and Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump arrived at West Palm Beach early on Tuesday after winding up his poll campaign as millions of Americans headed to the polls to choose between 2 sharply different visions for the country. Both Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris predicted a victory in their final day of campaigning, with polls showing the race as extremely close. Trump is due to cast his vote at Mandel Recreation Center in Palm Beach. On election day, Donald Trump posted on social media calling it the most important day in American history. He wrote, and I quote, "It is now officially election day. This will be the most important day in American history. Voter enthusiasm is through the roof because people want to make America great again. That means lines are going to be long. I need you to deliver your vote no matter how long it takes. Stay in line." Taking on Kamala Harris, he said the radical communist Democrats want you to pack up and go home. Together we are going to have a tremendous victory and make America great again. So we are counting down to that moment when Donald Trump and wife Melania Trump will be casting their ballots, while Kamala Harris appealed to voters on election day. Posting on social media, she stated, and I quote, "Today is your last chance to make an impact in this election. Help reach every last voter before polls close." So how does America vote? Well, Americans do not directly vote for their president. Instead, they vote to determine the composition of the Electoral College, which elects the U.S. president. Here's how the election number game works in the U.S. presidential election.
It's decision day in the America's battle for the White House, even if the results could take days to sort through. Under the US system, citizens do not vote directly for their leader. Instead, their ballots elect the 538 members of the group called the Electoral College, which then elects the president and the vice president of the United States. 270 is the majority mark, so the winner needs to secure 270 electors. Each state is allocated a specific number of electors, which is somewhat based on population. A vote cast in favor of a certain candidate is in effect meant to elect the candidate's state of electors in a state. These electors are chosen by the political parties prior to the election.
If you are registered to vote.
To win the presidency, a candidate needs to cobble together victories in enough states to reach the 270 mark in the Electoral College. Most states, with the exception of Maine and Nebraska, have a winner-takes-all system. This means whoever wins the popular mandate in the state secures its entire allocation in the Electoral College. This makes the result in most states, which are either firmly Democratic or Republican, a foregone conclusion before the first ballot is cast. It also means that certain states where the race is particularly close have outsized importance in the election. Most of the 82 million Americans have voted ahead of the election day voting in Tuesday in early voting. That is more than half of the total ballots cast in the last presidential election in 2020. Let's see as to why the results could be delayed. Certification is a formality, but there are risks it could be obstructed in certain states. In the immediate aftermath of the 2020 presidential election, at least 70 country election officials across 6 swing states attempted to prevent certification of country vote totals, many citing unsubstantiated claim of voter fraud in an attempt to justify their actions. This widespread effort to block certification in 2020 was unprecedented. Though the attempts failed across the board, contested certifications can potentially sabotage democratic elections around the United States. Interference with the certification now threatens to recur in the aftermath of the 2024 presidential elections. Successful obstructions could impact state and federal certification deadlines. Now let's take a look at what the deadlines are. The deadline for states to certify their results is 11th December, but many key states have earlier deadlines. Georgia, for example, must certify its final tally by November 22nd, while Michigan and Pennsylvania have until November 25th. Each state's appointed electors then cast their votes for the candidate who won in their popular vote. By December 25th, the electoral certificates of each state must be received by the President of the upper chamber of the US legislature, who is also the Vice President of the United States, in this case, Kamala Harris. On January 6th, the US legislature counts and confirms the results before the new president is inaugurated on January 20th. Bureau Report, DD India.
And our correspondents are on ground zero. Joining us are Shubhendu Ghosh from Washington, D.C. and Amritpal Singh from Palm Beach, Florida. Such a pleasure to have you. It's just the start of what's going to be marathon, maybe next few days, next few weeks, or for one doesn't really know for how long. Well, Shubhendu, how is the election day morning looking in Washington, D.C.?
Well, Munmun, good morning to you from Washington, D.C., the seat of the power in the United States. What an election it has been, so bitterly fought, and this is the big day. It has started already. Brisk voting is being reported across different polling stations in Washington, D.C. 7 a.m. is when the polling started. It will continue till later in the evening, but even the election day is going to be so long drawn. Given the time zones across which United States is situated, California on the West Coast is about 3 hours behind Washington, D.C. So there the voting would just start and would continue later than 7 p.m. here in Washington, D.C. So it is going to be a long day. The brisk voting has started. There is a certain degree of excitement and tension in the air, a lot of pressure on the voters. This is not one of those elections where supporters, voters can sit on the fence and watch from a distance. Both leaders have said that there is absolutely no chance that even a single vote could be left to waste, and therefore every vote counts. We saw those historic numbers in the early voting, over 80 million Americans voting in the early voting. The last record was held in 2020 elections when 2/3 of the registered voters had voted. But the brisk numbers that we're looking at, the queues that are already forming at the polling stations, expectations are that this very, very polarized elections could break the previous record of voter participation. Munmun?
Oh, indeed. At least half of those who voted last time around have already voted, haven't they? Well, Amrit, is anticipation building up there as Donald and Melania Trump ready to cast their ballots in Palm Beach?
That's right. It's around the curb because the media is not allowed near polling stations. So we're standing here. Donald Trump and Melania are expected in about an hour and a half from now to come and cast their votes. Donald Trump chose not to cast his vote in early voting, while Kamala Harris did. But as Shabhendu was saying, that a lot of people have already cast their votes. About 74 million have cast their votes in early voting and mail-in voting. Counting of that is going to take place, once the polls close, and that's where the time it takes time. But today, where I am in West Palm Beach, you can see long queues of voters outside the polling stations waiting to cast their vote. That it's been about 3.5 hours since voting began here. So there is considerable enthusiasm, one, and secondly, because it was so high stakes, both parties went all out to get their voter base out and still working to get each and every voter out, and that's why you see these long queues. If there are any indication, voting could surpass what the figures of 2020, Munmun.
Absolutely. Looking forward to how Florida votes this time around. It voted Republican, I understand, the last 2 times. Well, Shubhendu, Republicans have already filed more than 90 lawsuits challenging voting rules and practices even before a single ballot has been counted. And you would remember attempts to block certification that have been seen in the past election particularly. Is it a deeply divided polity and society? And among voters, building on what you had said earlier, do you sense a sense of fatigue or excitement peaking, or a bit of both?
Most certainly, Munmun, whether it's deeply divided society in general or not, but in this polling season, the issues have polarized people to a great extent. We saw Kamala Harris equating these elections with the rights of women, with women's right over their own bodies. Donald Trump equating these elections fundamentally with the idea of a secure America, with where borders are in control. So in that sense, voters, the choice that have been given to the voters are a very difficult one. So do you choose a secure America, or do you choose women's rights on one side? So in that sense, political polarization has seen the extremes this election season. The litigation, yes, that's what complicates the matters as well. These were on the expected lines. They happened in 2020 as well. A lot of litigations, a lot of lawyers from both sides are ready to approach the courts if the results don't turn in their favor, or if they suspect any malpractice from the other side. So that definitely complicates the election process. Also, security is a major concern. Munmun, I'm standing right in front of the US Capitol building. Remember, in 2021, this was the site of that very, very shocking insurgency attempt where the armed mob had stormed the US Capitol on the day when the Congress was to certify the winner of the presidential elections in 2021. And this time over, therefore, the security concerns are really, really high. Here in Washington, D.C., it's been turned into a fortress. All important buildings, White House, US Capitol here, Supreme Court and other buildings are completely out of reach for any visitors. Steel fencing barricade these buildings. There are patrolling being done by the police, sniper dogs, by the Secret Service. The National Security Guard, the National Guards have also been put on alert to meet any eventuality. Experts say that the kind of security arrangements at polling booths that has been done this time over has not been seen before. Bulletproof glasses have been put to use. Drone surveillance is being done. There are threats against polling stations and polling officers as well. So in that view, a very, very bitterly fought election, and that really continues as we speak.
Yes, Shubhendu, we'll come to you later on the show as well. Amrit, to you too. But before we let you go, Amrit, one question to you. You would recall that in 2020, some states took over 4 days to declare results, and Biden declared victory after Associated Press called Pennsylvania in his favor 3.5 days after the polls had closed. So how could it be this time around? When will we know the winner?
Okay, that's an interesting question. We don't know yet the answer to that yet, because it takes a long time. How they work here is that the counties have election boards. They declare results, but in a very strange fashion, TV networks start calling in the election as soon as trends are available. So it's easy to do that for predictable states, the ones that vote for red or the ones that vote for blue. It's easy. It's the battleground states. This time, because it's so neck and neck, and if it goes into recounts, if it goes into lawsuits, litigation, as already it has in some counties, even before the first ballot was cast, it could take a long time. Secondly, 74 million people have cast their votes in both early voting and postal ballot voting. So that has to be counted. So if the election is clear, then you would know by tomorrow who the next president of the United States would be. If it's not, then it could take days, even weeks, before we know who sits in the Oval Office for the next 4 years, Manmohan.
Too close to call, isn't it? We'll pick on that in a bit, but we'll request you all to stay with us as we come back to you in some minutes from now. And for now, we'll take a breather on DD India News Hour.